The video game boss has changed across generations. Skill, strategy, health management, and recognizing attacks all play a role, but from Bowser to Arkham Asylum's Joker, the idea is to test every lesson the game hopes you've learned to that point. However, what's more rarely talked about is death by cutscene. Some go down in history, others not so much. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 video game bosses defeated by a cutscene. Number 9. Super Joe Gibson, Bionic Commando. Bionic Commando's 3D debut was met with very mediocre reviews, despite having one of the coolest physics-based grappling hooks in gaming over a decade before they'd be everywhere like right now. The final boss sees Nathan "Rad" Spencer take the fight to his former comrade Super Joe Gibson. After swinging around and dismantling several mechanical archangels, Spencer's revenge on Joe is handled away from your controller. At first, Gibson has Nathan crushed in an iron grip. Then, to get on top, our hero violently headbutts his way into Joe's cockpit, finishing the job by ripping out his power core. While it may look visually impressive at first glance, the way Bionic Commando's climax pans out is just as 6 out of 10 as the rest of the game. How did we not have a final boss mechanic themed around that titular bionic arm? Number 8. The Prophet of Truth and the GRAVEMIND, Halo 3. For the final entry in the Halo trilogy, 2 primary antagonists remain. The first was the Prophet of Truth, who after backstabbing his fellow prophets, became the supreme master of the Covenant forces. The second was the GRAVEMIND, leader of the Flood and a big old fleshy mess intent on consuming all organic life. Rather than bringing back the wobbly boss fights from Halo 2, Bungie instead had the Prophet killed in a cutscene. It's a fitting story culmination as the Arbiter plunges his sword through the individual who deceived and manipulated both himself and his whole race. As for the GRAVEMIND though, it was killed off-screen, along with the eradication of the Flood at the game's conclusion. While players did briefly fight 343 Guilty Spark in the final moments, there was no similar fight with these other long-form foes. Halo 3 was a life-defining release regardless of how everything wrapped up, and it's down to you in the comments. Would you rather have fought these 2 enemies, or were you happy with the way it went down? Number 7. The Elders, XCOM 2. XCOM Enemy Unknown had a final boss in the form of the Uber Ethereal, the leader of the initial invasion. With a higher health pool and psychic psionic attacks that rarely miss, it's a suitably climactic battle to one of the best turn-based strategy games ever made. Enter XCOM 2, a sequel that by many accounts just couldn't keep that momentum up, putting you up against 3 stand-in avatars for the big finish, 1 for each Elder alien. Once they were down, that was it. A final cutscene shows you resisting and finally overcoming the Elder's own mind control as you escape the base for good. Considering how hard-fought a victory can be in any XCOM, let alone this much-hyped sequel, the backlash was so substantial that Firaxis released the immaculate War of the Chosen expansion, introducing 3 unique new opponents who could show up on missions: the Assassin, the Hunter, and the Warlock. It's up for debate whether any of this would have even been created if the original game had nailed its ending. Number 6. The LOCUST Queen, Gears of War 3. The Locust Queen is a consistent presence throughout the Gears trilogy, often narrating why the Locust are your main enemies in the first place. After first seeing the Queen at the close of Gears 1, come Gears 3 it was time to kill her and the Locust off for good. For the final encounter, however, you'll be fighting the Queen's monstrous mount, the Tempest. Not exactly cut out for combat, downing the Tempest takes gameplay away as the Queen gets stabbed by Marcus Phoenix using best friend Dom's knife. It's a supremely sweet moment to watch as the Queen dies along with the Locust and the Lambent, purging the planet Serra of all deadly threats, at least for that particular trilogy. Number 5. ATOQ NAVARRO, Uncharted Drake's Fortune. Typically, Uncharted games rely on 2 main antagonists, with the first game featuring Roman, a rival treasure hunter tipped off by Nate's mentor Sully, and ATOQ NAVARRO, leader of a band of mercenaries and Roman's right-hand man. For most of the game, ATOQ hovers over Roman's shoulder, guiding him towards the El Dorado treasure. However, in the final moments, he tricks this explorer and takes the statue for himself. Reaching Navarro's tanker, it's time for a showdown. You fight your way through the most difficult enemies in the game and reach the other end for the climax. However, after a weird cover system-based advance and a quicktime event, Navarro is dragged into the ocean along with the El Dorado statue as Nate shoulder barges a helicopter into the sea, killing him off in a cinematic. Number 4. Harley Quinn, Batman Arkham Asylum. Thanks to Margot Robbie's portrayal across the DCEU, it's easy to forget Tara Strong's iconic take across Batman animation and specifically the Arkham series. Beginning with Arkham Asylum, she proves a major thorn in Batman's side, triggering the Joker's takeover of the prison and kidnapping the warden Quincy Sharp. After being tracked to the main penitentiary, Harley is finally cornered in the control room. Quinn has never been a match for Batman in physical combat, so the cutscene that follows is very fitting. After taking out her goons, Harley flips towards the Caped Crusader for one final final attack, only to be immediately countered and subdued. This would become a running gag across the Arkham trilogy, with Arkham Knight even having Batman sling Harley over his shoulder simply because she presents zero real threat. Number 3. ELLIOT SALEM. Army of Two, The Devil's Cartel. Of all the cooperative shooters that tried to get you and a friend on board, Army of Two was one of the first, putting players in the shoes of Tyson Rios and ELLIOT SALEM. While it delivered a pretty unique feeling co-op experience with dual emotes and lots of team tactics, the end result never fully shook that lukewarm critical reception. Army of Two ended up getting 3 main entries which all settled into the AA space quite nicely. As former PMC operatives turned mercenaries tackled threats for the highest bidder, the most well-received was Army of Two, The 40th Day, which saw Salem turn on his former partner. ELLIOT ended up going insane after Tyson abandoned him in combat to save a hostage. Thus, he becomes a main antagonist later on in Army of Two, The Devil's Cartel. In one of the game's many disappointing elements though, you don't even get to battle Salem, as instead you fight through scores of foot soldiers instead. With Salem wounded among some flaming wreckage, he ends up being hauled off by Mexico's special forces, providing an anticlimactic end to both The Devil's Cartel and the series as a whole. Number 2. Chairman DREK. Ratchet & Clank 2016. In the original Ratchet & Clank, the duo went head-to-head with Chairman DREK, the corrupt leader of the Blog who sought to construct a new settlement from the pieces of other planets. The final battle unfolded fittingly on Ratchet's home planet of Veldin. Some 14 years later though, the original game in the series got an updated facelift for the PlayStation 4. For this awesome 2016 remake, many changes were made to levels and story, with a narrative voiceover approach that let Insomniac address the past while preparing for the future. While he appears to be the main primary antagonist, DREK is now unceremoniously written out the story when Dr. Nefarious turns him into a sheep and shoots him out an airlock. While this twist may have landed well enough with younger audiences, long-term fans had mixed reactions. Abruptly swapping to supposed fan favorite Dr. Nefarious was fine enough, but the final encounter felt rushed as hell. And number 1, the Alien Queen, Aliens Colonial Marines. While Aliens is an undisputed classic of sci-fi cinema, Gearbox outsourcing development of the much-anticipated Colonial Marines marked one of the most notoriously bad releases of all time. Misrepresented and misleading to the fanbase, it was a colossal disappointment. The few ambitious moments this had were swamped by poor programming, atrocious AI, and a supreme lack of polish. In addition, Colonial Marines focused far too much on battling generic Weyland-Yutani mercenaries rather than the xenomorphs. Slogging your way through this disappointing game isn't even worth the effort, as the climactic boss fight is pitiful too. After battling your way through the ruined surface of LV-426, it's time to make an escape. Much like the 1986 movie though, the xenomorph Queen is right there to block your path. Now, you'd think a final encounter with the Queen would be a worthy showdown, maybe use a power rig to smash its gooey face in, but no. Much like the rest of the game, it's hopelessly disappointing, letting you engage by just hitting some switches. Afterwards, the nastiest xenomorph of them all is just taken care of by the commanding officer instead. And those were just 9 video game bosses defeated by a cutscene. Let me know your favorites or the ones you hate the most down in the comments below. Also, please subscribe to the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast, as we have 3 shows a week with myself, Josh Brown, James Dowse, and of course, Jules Gill. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.